Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen, claiming responsibility. But President Trump tweeting this: Saudi Arabia oil supply was attacked. There is reason to believe that we know the culprit, are locked and loaded depending on verification, but are waiting to hear from the kingdom as to who they believe was the cause of this attack and under what terms we would proceed. Joining me now, Marc Thiessen, columnist at the Washington Post and a Fox News contributor. I know that you follow all of these things very closely. What do you make of the weekend, and also just about this idea that the president already getting out there and saying, we know who's behind it?
Well, they do know who's behind it, because even if it was the Houthis, and we don't think it was, they're a Tehran proxy. So regardless whether it was done by proxy or done directly, U.S. officials are telling other news organizations, they've said that it was the missiles were actually fired from Iranian territory. So we'll see what the intelligence says when they're ready to release it. But wouldn't it be ironic if we actually launched a military strike on Iran after John Bolton left? I think that would be
a
fascinating development.
It would be great to have some armchair quarterbacking on that if we could. But Marc Short, the vice president's chief of staff, he was asked a question earlier about what does locked and loaded actually mean. Here's what he said.
I think locked and loaded means several things. One thing it means is that America today, under this president, is far better prepared to handle these sorts of events because we're now a net exporter of oil.
That is a very good point. Let me also have you listen to Senator Chris Coons. He's on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He had this to say.
Iran is one of the most dangerous state sponsors of terrorism. This may well be the thing that calls for military action against Iran, if that's what the intelligence supports.
I thought that was quite a remarkable statement.
That is. I mean, if there would be bipartisan support for a forceful response, whatever the president chooses, because this is if this actually came from Iranian territory attacking a U.S. ally like this, that's a unprecedented escalation on the part of Iran. And look, what's happening here, Dana, is that the Iranians are buckling under the weight of the sanctions that Donald Trump has put on them. Fox News reported on Friday that 17 of 18 Iranian pension funds, including those of the armed forces, are near collapse.
Marc,
they're near collapse.
Let me stop you just for a moment, because the Secretary of Defense just tweeted, I'm going to read this cold. He said that the United States military, with our interagency team, is working with our partners to address this unprecedented attack and defend the international rules-based order that is being undermined by Iran. You also think, though, that President Trump is getting a lesson in the nature of our enemies. Tell me more about that.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, just a week ago, the president invited the Taliban to come to Camp David for a signing ceremony of an agreement, and they responded by carrying out a suicide bombing in which they killed an American soldier, which forced the cancellation of that summit. And bragged about it, and then forced the cancellation of that summit. And now you've got him. He wanted to meet with the Iranian president, was open to that at the UNGA, and the Iranians responded by carrying out an unprovoked attack on Saudi Arabia. So I think the lesson for the president here is that not every terrorist and tyrant around the world is as desperate for a photo op with you as Kim Jong-un.
Do you think that the president would need to go to Congress before taking action? You see some people
No, he does not need to go to Congress. No, he does not need to go to Congress. He is a commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and if there is an attack on a U.S. ally, he has the authority to go ahead and do that. I mean, and the reality is, look, what's happening here is the Iranians are trying to pressure Europe to lift to get us to lift the sanctions, to get us to lift the maximum pressure. Because one of the developments is, as you noted in the opening of this, is that we're not dependent on Middle Eastern oil anymore because we're the world's largest oil producer. Europe is dependent on oil coming out of the Middle East, and also we don't trade with Iran. Europe does. So Europe has an interest in not having tensions with the United States and not having any threat to the oil shipments coming out of the Middle East.
It's a good point, because it was France who just, I think, was it last week or two, basically was like trying to push the president in a direction that the president didn't want.
No, that's exactly right. And look, if you think about it, a few months ago we were talking about how Iran was targeting all of the oil shipping going through the Straits of Hormuz, and very little attention paid to it. But the New York Times reported that in June, the Trump administration launched a massive cyber attack on Iran that cut off their ability to target that shipping. So now they're going after the oil refineries.
Marc Thiessen, always a pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you.
Good to be with you. Thanks.
Federal prosecutors seeking